Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It is Aaron, and we've got a really interesting topic for today. We've been meaning to dig into some AI use cases specifically, and we've been doing that here and there, but we wanted to talk a little bit more about coding copilots today. And for that discussion, we have Andrew Filev, CEO at ZenCoder. So first of all, Andrew, do a quick introduction, and how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for hosting. As you said, I'm currently founder and CEO of ZenCoder, building best-in-class AI coding agents. I've been around the block. So my previous business, Wrike, we built and sold for more than $2 billion. So it was good outcome for our investors and employees and everybody involved. I'm a product guy by heart, so love building products that are used by millions of users. That's one of the reasons why I'm super passionate about ZenCoder, because through my career, I think only about 2 or 5% of my ideas ever saw daylight, despite me previously running a company with more than 1,000 employees. So would love if myself and everybody around me could ship better software products faster. And then originally I'm an engineer by training. As I said, I've been around the block. On the AI side, ZenCoder is the most fun thing that I've done. Prior to that, I had an interesting hobby project back in 2012. There was this thing called DARPA Robotics Challenge competition where we're supposed to uh, kind of operate humanoid robots in a semi-autonomous environment for disaster recovery scenarios. So that was one of my sort of christenings with ML and AI. I really enjoyed that part. It didn't go anywhere, but it was still fun because I got a exposure to reinforcement learning, agents planning, kind of a decade before they became topic of the day. So enjoyed that as well.
Fantastic. And yeah, before we dig into the coding copilots, I also would like to get your take on kind of the state of the industry and state of startups, if you will, a little bit. Because as someone who has built and ran a very large organization, and you also continue to invest in other startups, um, what's kind of your take on startups and funding in today's AI frenzy world, if you will, of like, in the Reich days, did you ever foresee a time when funding rounds would be bigger than most valuations from years ago? And honestly, is this a sustainable business model
Yeah,
going
it's
forward?
a
What's
great
your thoughts?
question, and of course, always a matter of perspective, right? So one way to look at it is, again, some of those valuations top what Apple, was worth some time ago, right? Or you look like at first funding rounds of companies like Microsoft or Google, and so you're correct that we live in interesting times. That said, as our I don't invest institutionally, so but once in a while I back friends companies. And I can tell you that it's still all over the place, right? Some companies are what you would call overvalued, but there are still some companies that operate fairly lean and valued reasonably. And I think my take on the industry, like I lived through several bubbles. I've got some gray hair in the way, right? So my first business I started right around their uh, .com bubble time, and then for Reiki, they're like one of our kind of prime development times when kind of was going around GFC and global financial crisis. So I've seen a couple of them. Uh, this feels a little bit different in the sense that I feel there's tremendous economic value created right now, and so there will absolutely be winners. And the way I'm thinking about it is that like we will see through this kind of Gen AI Cambrian growth period, Cambrian explosion period, right? We'll see probably 100 unicorns created. Again, the way I conceptualize in my head is like there's going to be at least 20 categories where AI really matters. Either existing categories which are completely redefined with AI, or brand new categories that you and I haven't thought through yet. And within those categories, typically, it's a race, and when like 10 to 20 companies play, and at least five of them cross that $1 billion mark. So I think there's got to be at least 100 unicorns created, and from that perspective, some investors will make good returns. But yeah, also feel that a lot of companies have been overvalued, especially I think a year ago there was a common belief that you got to invest in like yet another foundational model, and those things are pretty expensive. And everybody was like, "Oh, do you have GPUs? Do you not have GPUs?" Where in reality, it like felt so funny. Like why does it matter? And it's but back then, kind of my opinion was a contrarian. I was like, "Hey, we can actually do so much more post foundational training." And that is less commoditized based. And all the investors were like, no, 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 you got to build foundational models. You got to have GPUs. That's where the differentiation is. Like, now a year later, foundational models are extremely competitive and commoditized, right? And where a lot of differentiation happens at their next layer, kind of more towards domain specific applications or verticalized or application layer. So, and again, that kind of drives more reasonable investor behavior. And that also makes businesses, frankly, a little bit less capital intense. I'm not talking obviously about frontier labs. That's a completely separate category. I'm talking about general startup universe. So that makes the businesses more fundable, more capital efficient, better ROIs for investors, sort of better profile for everybody. Also, if you look at their kind of the drive evaluations a year ago, some of that was driven by strategic rounds, right? And if strategic invests in Anthropic and gives them sort of basically their own cloud time, it's a little bit different story than you pulling their dollars out of your own pocket, if you know what I mean. So again, I think they're for their frontier models, that's not my area of expertise. I cannot comment on how much OpenAI should be worth or Anthropic or something like that. But for application companies, I think there are some good companies that will generate good returns, and I think the market there will kind of stabilize sooner and hopefully without major bubble bursts, but more like kind of just gradually become more reasonable and converge across good companies. So a little bit of a
Well,
long answer, but hopefully helpful.
no, that's fantastic, Andrew. Thank you very much for that insight. And yeah, it is kind of funny because we always threw around the unicorn term, meaning it was something super special. But yeah, when you get hundreds of unicorns, at what point do they stop becoming unicorns, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, well, let's talk about this. So one of the leading use cases that really has come from Gen AI and frontier models and LLMs is coding copilots. And it might be, at least in my opinion, probably the biggest and most profitable use case. Like you'll see, others in the industry starting to generate revenue around this. And so, what is your thoughts on coding copilots as a whole? First of all, so like if we take AI and just break it down to just coding copilots, what's kind of the state of the industry for coding copilots? Because everything is moving so fast. So yeah, again, this might be a little bit of a timely question of like, hey, what does it look like in February of 2025?
Mm-hmm. Uh, Great question, great timing of that question. So I fundamentally believe that a lot of technologies, if you look at them at specific technology, they develop in what is called S curve from the letter S, kind of like like a snake. And for mathematicians, that's more like a sigmoid curve, but basically slow to pick up and then super rapid growth and then kind of tapers off into what in economy you would call a curve of diminishing return, right? So now if you sum up a lot of those curves, then you get exponential growth, and that's what, as consumers, we typically observe, like the Moore's law and whatnot, right? But if you zoom in, like a lot of it is just kind of those bursts that then taper off. And so, if you think about AI copilots for code, I feel it's a perfect example where there's been a lot of hype over the last 2 years, but as is usually kind of is usually happens with hype, it was premature. So I feel that the previous several years were just building up to the amazing burst of growth that we're going to see in the next 12 months. And then it might taper off a little bit, right? So I feel the most transformative time for the software industry is going to be the next 12, 24, 36 months. And it's both kind of, I, I, I see some data points for it, and I also kind of feel the vibe, if you will, in the industry, right? So the data points would be they're one of the best examples to put number around this. There's a benchmark in our space called SWE-bench, SWE from the word software engineering. And so the benchmark that specific benchmark is built over a dozen of open source repositories where people took the real code repositories from internet, took the real requests that people had on those projects, and now they're asking AI to basically fulfill that request. Say there was a bug in a software project, and now AI is asked to fix that bug, right? And so there's a kind of a scraped version of it, which has about 2,000 issues, and a clean version of it, which has about 500, called Bench Verify. And so where the industry was a year ago is state of the art was 4%. So AI agents could look at those different issues, kind of at the backlog of those things, and on average fix about 4% of it, which sounds reasonable, right? And then there was a lot of hype over the internet when a company called Cognition released an agent that could fix 13% of bugs, and they also kind of hyped it a lot. They called it Devin, like a human, you know. So there was kind of a lot of controversy around this. Kind of what can it do, what can it not do? So, and again, but that was a huge jump from 4% to like 13, 14%. But where we finished last year was around 50%, and you could see this kind of this curve rapidly accelerating. And 50% is a real business, you know. So if on your project you could fix half of the bugs with AI, that's tremendous. Now, I wouldn't say that it's apples to apples because it was one programming language, specifically Python. There was mostly backend issues, so I'm not saying 50% of anything, right? But it's still if we want to put the number on that progress, that is a good number that shows you how rapidly this evolves on a daily basis right now, on a weekly basis. And so, yes, very soon we'll have very, very capable AI agents that can pick a bug from your backlog or pick a very simple feature and implement it for you. And what's even more important, what's coming later this year, we'll be able to verify some of that work, right? Because to some degree, what's important is how reliable that is. Sometimes you would rather pick the system that can fix 5% of your bugs, but there's no false positives. Everything that it's said it's done correctly, right? Sometimes that's more preferable than something that tells you, oh, I fixed 50% of your bugs, but then half of that is not fixed and just introduce more trouble. So that component of making the system more reliable and higher quality is going to be the main kind of tipping point for the industry. And that's what we're seeing right now already happening with our company. And that's what we're going to see more through the year. And that's what's going to actually change the industry. And then, as I mentioned, there's the vibes. And so I'm constantly in conversation with different VPs of engineering. And I see several of them who were not believers a year ago, and now they're believers, right? And again, they were not believers a year ago for two reasons. Because they were told that, or I'm just going to install this thing and it's going to improve my engineering productivity by 25%. And guess what? It didn't. Right? So they were a little bit disillusioned. It was still helpful, right? Like having good code completion that's occasionally correct is helpful. Just kind of like in Gmail, sometimes it auto completes for you and it's good. And having AI chat that again, it's better than Stack Overflow. So that's good to a certain extent. So those tools were already good and helping you, but it wasn't a game changer, right? So I would still, even a year ago, I would still recommend everybody use one, right? Because again, I think the cost was like laughable, $20 a month. You compare that to an engineer's salary or their stock options, it's like nothing, right? So of course use it, of course it's helpful. But what I'm saying is that this year, not only that, but we will actually see how people change the way they work with those agents and the way they develop software, which gets really, really interesting.
No, that's fantastic. And let me ask you, because this is also too, when we were talking about those frontier models, and then we talk about more specialized models, and certainly models that are specifically trained for coding. Um, what's your thoughts on like when and how do you pick and choose, right? Because obviously, if you got a model that is specifically for coding, it's going to be trained on those tasks, and it does, you know, that level of reasoning, and it kind of focuses in on that one specific thing. But then you have these frontier LLMs that, you know, some folks are just going to say, well, hey, this is just good enough. Right. And so tell everyone a little bit about like at what's that tipping point between trying to figure out a frontier model versus a specialized coding model.
Great question. And the way I like to say it is that when it comes to that, we're not religious, right? And so there something I used to say before, just in general about kind of career and style and everything, is kind of have high ambition but low ego. So I feel that some of the AI stuff is sort of ego driven, like I want to develop it in house, right? And and that's basically why people want to do something, like they want their name on the paper, and that kind of overshadows everything else. We're much more pragmatic. We want to deliver the best AI system possible for our customers. So what this means is that uh, we develop fairly sophisticated workflows, and then for each step of that workflow, we try to build an evaluation set, right? Or think of it as internal benchmark, and then run our models and third-party models against those benchmark, and then see what wins, and kind of also see where things are trending, right? And I'll give you some specific examples that are easy to get. So on one side of the spectrum, you have features like code completion, where end to end, meaning from the time you type something to the time you see completion on your screen, typically for good experience, that round trip should happen in half a second, so 500 milliseconds, right, between the your keystrokes and the suggestion. Then it feels magical, smooth, fluid. So, and if you look at frontier models, even the smallest ones oftentimes takes just a second to start streaming the first token. So by definition, you're already incapable of solving that problem with the frontier model, right? So in that case, you have to have something hosted locally, and then you can either start with a smaller open source model, or you can train your own, or even better, what happens most often in the industry is you start with some open source model and then you train on top of it, so you don't have to redo the work that's already been done 10 times before. You kind of create value on top of it. So, and then we look at the opposite extreme of that. Say you're having their model that sits at the core of your agentic workflow, and it has to understand user requests. It has to understand what software products typically do and do not do, and which means that in its training data, it should have observed a lot of different examples from a variety of different fields. And then it should also be exposed to a variety of different repositories, either through kind of properly filtered permissive open source repositories, or through the data that their lab paid to acquire, like when they pay their labelers to create some data, right? So that's a lot of data, and that's typically the biggest models possible, because you can wait for an extra 30 seconds if that means you have a better solution, right? Because the alternatives, you fix the problem yourself, and that can take you 30 minutes if you're experienced in that project, and 3 days if it's the first time you see that project, right? So compared to that, whether it takes 3 minutes or 4 minutes, it's like whatever, potato potato, right? So in that case, you want to use the biggest, baddest, meanest model possible. And so again, we kind of evaluate on our benchmark, and that typically ends up being one of the frontier models. And that, by the way, can change quarter on quarter, or year on year. So today it could be the best model from OpenAI. Tomorrow it could be the best model from Anthropic. The day after maybe Gemini, right? So but you got to test them in the specific specific scenario that you're using them, with the data that will give enough diversity to be able to resemble the real usage, and then based on that you can make educated choice.
Nice.
And then on top of it, sorry for kind of a tail there, but there's also a variety of different ways you can use that model, right? So the models get more and more sophisticated. So for the consumer, it's kind of pretty simple, right? Like, oh no, actually no, even for the consumer, right? I'm a frequent user of ChatGPT, but I have to make a choice right now, right? Do I use 4.0 because I want to respond right away? Do I use 0.1 Pro, which I really like because I want to get a better answer that has less hallucinations? Or do I want to use deep research, which is going to take five minutes, but then it's going to kind of scrape the internet for me, right? So even they're different. Even those very, very simple models, if you will, very, very simple workflows, you already have to make the choice. Now, when we work with those models, it's much more sophisticated because we try to enable tool access, and we give them various all sorts of different tools, including some that you would never use, like syntax analysis and uh, parsing the code graphs and dependency trees and whatnot, right? And so then again, those evaluations become harder and more complex, because if the system performs performs well for their general chat, it might not necessarily be the best system to use programming tools under the hood.
Nice, nice. And a follow-up question to that, as you're talking about like different models under the hood, if you will, do you get then like what's the temperature, or do you get pushback from organizations? Because I understand, at the consumer level that making sense, but also too, I'm seeing increasingly, oh, if you're going to use AI, you might have to do like the IT department or the security department might have to go, well, we want to know what models are you using and where is that data going and is it going to get trained on other things? And what is your thoughts on that and kind of the
Mhm.
state of trust,
Yeah,
maybe for lack of a better term, in the
I,
industry right now?
I compared to cloud adoption, where again, when cloud just appeared, people were religiously no, which I thought was the wrong approach, right? And but then as the years went by, companies went smarter and smarter, both on the vendor side and the buyer side. On the buyer side, they learned to ask the right questions and evaluate the vendors on the right in the right dimensions. And on the vendor side, they tighten their cyber posture and whatnot to the point where, and it's absolute truth, where a lot of cloud vendors run their shop much tighter than their customers would do on premise, right? So it's actually more secure deployment for you to go to cloud. And if you look like at different statistics, they would prove that, right? So I feel the same is absolutely true with AI. If somebody's like, oh, I'm only going to use the local model on my server. Oh, by the way, my servers are very poor. Like it's not like I'm going to run the best model. Well, good luck to you, and you're only going to get so much productivity out of that, right? Versus uh, if uh, if you truly have very sophisticated sort of GPU cluster internally that can run the largest models, yes, theoretically, you can get a pretty good performance out of fine-tuned versions of the largest DeepSeek or Qwen when sort of like, because it's kind of like OpenAI and Anthropic here on the US side. We have on the China side, we have DeepSeek and Qwen for who do their own kind of lettering. So anyway, so you can at this point get pretty decent performance from open source, fine-tuned open source models. In certain use cases, absolutely comparable to the frontier models. But in certain use cases, still not there, right? If you want to use the best software coding agent, unfortunately, neither DeepSeek nor Qwen are there yet. They will be, I'm absolutely confident in that, but not today. And so it comes back to like, okay, I'm saving this many millions of dollars, accelerating my roadmap by this many quarters. What am I ready to what am I ready to pay for it, and what sort of risks can I take, right? And so just like with cloud, the temperature kind of the ice melted over the years. I do see that ice melting right now, where about 18 months ago, everybody was trying to lock everything down, versus right now, everybody's asking the right questions. As you mentioned, where does my data go? Does anybody train on my data? What sort of protections do I get? What sort of cyber posture is there? What about PII? So people ask the right questions, and vendors are starting to give the right answers and tighten it. And so I think that where this will all converge very quickly is that most of the vendors will have the right posture and the right tooling and the right processes, and most of the customers will be absolutely comfortable with that. But then there obviously will be use cases like defense where it absolutely will be locked down. And then there will be use cases in the middle, like industries in the middle, like finance, where something might be locked down and maybe something will be allowed to kind of be used in the outside cloud.
Fantastic. Final topic I wanted to touch on real quickly. We'll kind of talk about maybe almost like a little bit of a crystal ball, looking into your crystal ball and making a little bit of a prediction into the future. Um, we see a lot of, I'll just use the clickbaity terms, right? Of like, oh, coding copilots, especially as we approach the agentic phase of all of this. Well, it might make computer science degrees, not as valuable anymore, or it might make junior developers not as necessary anymore. And so, what is your thoughts on kind of the entry level into the market and the impact coding copilots will have on that?
Mhm. Uh, I personally believe in what's called Jevons paradox, right? A very popular term lately that in certain industries, their improvement in productivity actually drives more usage of the resource. And so in this case, if improvement in productivity of engineers will actually make engineers more in demand and more engineers will be needed in the market. We've seen that in the past where if history is a lesson, there have been distinct jumps, generational jumps in productivity. So way back in the days, it was punch cards. I don't know if your listeners know this or remember this, right? Then we went to assembly, and I'm not, I wasn't learning on punch cards, but when I studied, I did study assembly, right? And then I studied C, and then I studied C++, and your productivity in C++ will be 10 times better than in assembly, right? And then there's Java, and then there's Python, and then we have a bunch of open source libraries that do what previously would take you like 3 months on a team, and now you can do like a teenager could use overnight. And then we have cloud, which significantly simplifies the deployment and kind of gives you infinite scalability and whatnot. So we already have been through multiple generations of 10x improvement in engineering productivity. And all we saw so far is just more and more engineers needed and more software being developed and kind of needed for in the market. And again, using my own example, as I told you, like only about 2% of my ideas were ever implemented, right? And so I do feel that we will need more engineers than ever, but at the same time, whenever such transformations happen, people need to catch up, right? Like they will, and that I think is a fair trade because when people go into technology, by definition, they should be ready to learn. It's been a little bit different in the last say 5, 10 years, but like 20 years ago, you were expected to be constantly learning if you were a computer scientist, if you were a software engineer. So same goes here. I think you got to stay on your toes. You got to keep learning, but there will be needed more engineers than ever. And to your specific question about junior developers, yes, AI will be able to do a lot of junior work. And so I guess the apprenticeship part for the engineering career might change a little bit, like how you go from college to be somebody who runs those AI agents. But again, I think typically what happens when those changes happen is like what you learn through the college and what you do through the college and your internships and your kind of hobby project also changes, right? It's not like, oh, you're gonna go through the college as if it's 1999 and then you go into the job market as if it's 2030, right? As you go through those years of your education, you will get basic computer science foundational education, which I feel is extremely important, was always important, irregardless of like, hey, you might be using JavaScript and Tailwind, you still need to understand how the machines work, right, and what happens underneath with the data structures and whatnot. And same goes here. I feel the value of fundamental computer science is still going to be there. I think the value of basic math will be even more, will kind of get the resurgence because all AI relies a lot on linear algebra and some calculus and statistics and whatnot. And then I feel through your school and education and your hobby projects, you will acquire the knowledge of how to properly operate AI agents, just like today, through that period of learning, you learn how to use open source libraries, you learn how to use AWS and GCP, you learn how to use GitHub, and so by the time you get into the industry, you already know how to use all those tools so you can be the most productive. And so here I feel the same. It's just that people going out of the college into their career will actually be 5 times more productive than junior developers today. And again, as they progress through that career, be 10 times more productive.
Nice, nice. That's a fantastic summary, Andrew. Thank you very much for that. So I think on that, actually, we're going to close out there. So for everyone that's out there, if anyone is interested, where can they go for more information or how can they contact you?
For more information, it's zencoder.ai, ZENCODER.ai, zencoder.ai. And then to contact me personally, I think LinkedIn is the best way to go. I'm not a hip person, so not TikTok account, but you can find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message there.
Fantastic. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for your time today. And everyone out there, thank you very much for listening this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend. Please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, always give us feedback as well. show@thecloudcast.net. We'd love to hear from you. On behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening this week. And we will talk to everyone next week.